G'day and welcome to the What's Next podcast with Pete and Dave. I'm Dave.
I'm Pete.
Welcome. Today we're talking to Nick Petrie, vertical development and leadership coach. He's a New Zealander. He talks to us from his home in New Zealand, where he's recently made the move from the United States during lockdown. And he's got a master's degree from Harvard, looking at and used to work, for the Center for Creative Leadership. And now he runs his own practice in vertical development and leadership development. We talked to him about vertical development itself and what actually makes up vertical development, what to find inside of it when you look at it.
And also how you might apply vertical development to some of your leadership approaches and how it might enhance the future of work going forward.
Enjoy the episode. First things first, Nick. Hello. How are you?
Yeah, good.
Where do you join us from?
So from Nelson, New Zealand. I was in the US for the last 12 years, and we came back when everything went virtual and everyone was just doing it at home. We wondered, do we really need to be in the US, or could we be doing this from New Zealand, where I'm from? So we came back, and my wife, who's from Melbourne, and four young boys. Yeah, and so now we're in Nelson, New Zealand, top of the South Island.
Awesome. Unreal.
Cool. Excellent.
And you're pending a house move, pending lockdown, pending government decisions and all the rest.
That's right. Oh, that's the way of the world, isn't it? It sort of gets out of your own hands, and you've just got to decide how you want to deal with all of that uncertainty. So,
I feel you, because I'm pending a house sale, pending government decisions, pending the end of lockdown. So yes, it's rough.
Yeah, there's a lot of dominoes, and we're all dependent on each other these days.
Yeah,
that's right.
It's like the whole world's pending, really, at the moment.
Seriously, honestly.
So before we kick off, we might just do a quick check-in, although we've already had a bit of a chat. And I thought something that would be interesting to talk about was, what's the weirdest thing you've seen in the last 2 weeks?
Kick us off, mate, because I'm still thinking.
Yeah, okay. So the weirdest thing I've seen was yesterday or the day before. I was walking out of a workshop, because still here in Adelaide, we are not pending anything. We can actually go out and about, which is fantastic. Mm-hmm. And I turned around and I was dragging my case full of all my bits and pieces back to the car, and there was this big picture of Patrick Bateman from American Psycho that someone had wallpapered up on the wall, and it said something about, "They take your money while they kill you," spray painted over the top of it. And it was just so odd that I stopped and I looked at it for a while, and I was like, God, that's really weird. There's something really obscure about that. And then I kind of paused and looked at it for a while, and then I was like, right, okay, back to reality, and off to the car I went. So I think that was probably the weirdest thing I've seen this week. I actually took a photo of it on my phone, so I might put it in the show notes.
That's hilarious.
It was pretty funny.
My goodness. I'm reminded, probably the weirdest thing, it was almost just one of the most awkward things I've seen, is in Adelaide they've got those scooters. I know they do them around in different cities where you can rent the scooter off the side of the road and just drive it around city blocks. They've got them in Brisbane and in Perth and here in Adelaide as well. And I'm in my car sitting at a set of lights, and this lady's pulled up, little tiny petite girl has pulled up in her scooter to the lights to press the button, and she's stopped too early and realised that she can't quite reach the button to cross the road. And I've sat there and watched this lady drag the scooter with all her might, because it's quite heavy, drag the scooter with all her might towards this press, just to press the button. And then in order to drag it, she's now like jackknifed the thing and kind of dragged it the wrong way. So now she's waiting for the lights, only to realise when they went green that she's pointed the wrong direction, and she's got to kind of drag it around. Oh my gosh, it was so awkward to watch. It was hilarious. Anyway, that's the weirdest thing I've seen. How about yourself, Nick? What have you seen that's weird in the last couple of weeks?
Geez.
In lockdown, mate, I'm sure you've seen heaps.
Yeah, we've just started lockdown. We're not really used to it. So I feel like we've got the four young boys in the lounge trying to entertain themselves. So I feel like every time I go out to the lounge, there is something very weird happening as they try and entertain themselves. And I often I walk back in here and begin work again without trying to understand what was going on. So I'm sort of surrounded by it. I don't need to leave the house at the moment.
Excellent.
That's great. Awesome. Well, thanks for checking in. I think it's an important part of, I guess, what we're trying to build together with the podcast as well, is just to connect and check in when we're remote as well, so that it's not just all business, but there's a bit of fun.
Right.
How are you finding connecting with others online now that you have made the decision to move away from the States and be in northern parts of the South Island and kind of out of the way? How are you staying connected from a business point of view and keeping it some business, but I guess also just relationships afloat and things like that as well?
Well, honestly, I've found it great doing everything virtually. And I felt like a bit of an outlier because I was dealing in workplaces with lots of people who were struggling with it. I was finding life much easier.
Right.
In the US, there's a lot of flying. Every time you need to go do something, it's never in your city. There's 50 different states and 150 different cities. So you are just constantly on a plane, and it's quite a grind. It's fun, but it's a grind after a while. And when I went virtual, I found it far easier to do the work, and I could just focus on the work. And for whatever reason, I was doing this sort of work where it worked to do it virtually. You didn't need 5 days or 3 days or something like that. So it was sort of fortunate. Then socially, I don't know. I get a lot out of my relationships with clients. I find that is quite enjoyable. I am probably in this period of my life, with kids growing up, I've probably been not that social. In the US, we were just like pushing hard to get through it all. So I'm feeling now I'm needing to invest more time back into social aspects now we've got home, which feels healthier. It's awesome. Out of balance before.
Yeah, great. Excellent. So let's talk about work. What is it that you were traveling around and doing, and what are you doing remotely now?
Yeah, so in the US, I worked at Center for Creative Leadership, which is a big leadership development organization over there. So I was doing leadership development. It was mainly individual leadership development, but I started to see the more I was doing it, we were sort of developing these leaders doing really, great stuff. They were growing, but they were going back to these organizations which essentially hadn't changed and were holding them back. And so I started to see, wow, if you're just going to do individuals without doing the culture, it's pretty hard on everyone. It doesn't actually serve these individuals that well often. So started doing more around how do you help organizations evolve their cultures to fit the context they're in. And they all needed that, but they knew they needed it. They weren't really aware how to do it. So what I do is a combination of individual and collective development for organizations.
Okay, great. And just to zoom in on the culture piece for a little bit, what have you found giving you traction in those conversations at the moment? Is it the collective piece? Is it the combination of the individual and the collective? Is there something organizational happening at the same time? Like where does traction live in organizations that need that cultural shift?
I think the senior leaders have worked out that things, people have been talking about VUCA for a long time, right? You guys all know that. But what I'm hearing from them now is like, we are deeply experiencing it. We talked about it as a concept, but it wasn't in our bones, but now we are suffering from it. And they can see that their organizations really need to evolve. A lot of them are just realizing what made us really successful doesn't work now. Stuff's changing. We need to change. But at the same time, we're so busy. We've got to keep delivering on everything we've already got. And we need to transform at the same time. That's really hard. We want to do it, but it's too hard. We don't have time to do it. But do it, but don't do it. And so they're all really grappling with this challenge of delivering and needing to change and transform.
It's something I've run into talking with some clients and organizations as well, is that it's almost attractive to try and be half pregnant. It's like you get this, we've got to change, we've got to be innovative, we've got to do something, let's build a program, let's run a project, let's do something. Then the rubber hits the road and they're like, this means we've actually got to do things like real different, or we've got to reorg, or we've got to change. It's like, we'll stick with the project. And you're like, this is a huge opportunity to be part of what's coming, part of what's next, It's a big change.
It's got one of the challenges, I think, is just it's a longer term payoff, whereas the short term demands on them are sort of very obvious.
Yep.
And it's easier to focus on those. It's harder to focus on the longer term culture stuff. They recognize it's important, but it's hard. It's hard. It's a grind to do both at once.
Yeah,
definitely.
And I think that was one of the things that, the approach that we've been experimenting with over the last sort of 12 to 18 months in some organizations is, how do you turn that development into something that's not extra work? Because, a lot of people will agree to that first workshop, and then after they get back into their real job, that whole focus on development disappears. And how do you transform that development and build it into the work so that it's just little micro pieces of extra work, not seen as this big piece of extra work, which then they obviously don't want to participate in because of the bandwidth that it takes up, and that can be quite stressing.
That's dead right. And one of it's such a tricky one. It's almost like the holy grail, I think, at the moment, is can you get development into the flow of work? And so a few concepts like I've found clients resonating with, Clayton Christensen, who did the work around the innovator's dilemma at Harvard and disruptive innovation and all that stuff. After that, he went on and did work around jobs to be done, which is thinking about your end users' jobs to be done. What is it that they have to get done, and fusing your solution with that. And I think that's a big thing for leadership development, organizational development. Focus less on the programs and all of that. Focus, what are the jobs to be done for the leaders, and can you make the development still important but sort of incidental or stealth in the process of them getting their jobs to be done.
Hide it in the process.
I mean, who wouldn't agree with that? But still hard to do. But I reckon that's the direction we're all trying to head.
And I think that's what we've found is by naturally adopting parts of the Agile process, which that work methodology lends itself towards stealth. You can hide some things in, and the processes like retrospectives, which are that natural scheduled reflection time, which people don't get enough time to do because they're so busy, is actually built into part of their work, so they don't feel guilty about it.
They're looking for hooks, right? So if you're planning a retrospective, everyone's like, well, what are we going to reflect on this week? It's like, well, actually, here's a framework. Let's bring that in and talk about it for a bit. Yeah. So
how hard is it to get them to actually, schedule and do those things?
You've got to commit. You've got to get the project or the team to commit to running an Agile process. That doesn't necessarily need to be fully Agile, because that can scare some teams, but you need to commit to at least the ceremonies and a bit of a cadence to it. Once you've got the cadence locked in, and you can start to run or at least get permission from the team to run, call it half a dozen of these, all of a sudden they're going to look back on, 6-12 weeks before and go, oh, wow, we really have covered a lot of ground in the last 2-3 months. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Cadence and buy-ins. Okay.
Yep.
That's good. Yeah.
And because the retrospective is part of the actual Agile methodology, they actually are they're going to reflect on something. So how would you just select what part of, that VUCA capacity that they need to build? And in that cadence, do you select a skill to work on or a skill to build for that 2 to 3 weeks? And then come back and reflect on it, because that reflection period has been built into the work process. So they're going to do it anyway. So you're just giving them something to target on.
That's good. That's good. I like that.
Definitely. Let's jump in for a sec into your how. So we've talked a little bit about VUCA and about leadership development. How is it that you're walking people through leadership development? And I guess specifically looking at your material and vertical development, give us a beginner's guide to it. What is it, and what do you take people through?
Well, I mean, I was doing leadership development for 12 or so years, and I was thinking, I felt like I learned the best stuff was doing it, and it wasn't really, leaders liked it, but it didn't seem to be shifting things, and they were still stuck with the same problems as before. So I sort of stopped, took a sabbatical, went into a master's, looked around for what might the future of leadership development be, and started to learn more and more around adult development, vertical development, these ideas. And this was, for me, was a bit of a revelation because I started to see, this is a missing piece. It's fine to focus on the competencies and the skills and the behaviors and what do they need to know. But the idea around vertical development was that people evolve over time. It doesn't necessarily feel like it to you. We feel like sort of, I'm me. I'm who I'm always been. But researchers who are following people over a long period of time notice that they evolve, and they evolve in predictable ways through these different stages or mindsets of development. And so this idea had been around for a while. And so I started to play around with it. I was like, this is good. And the challenge was describing it to leaders in a way they could understand and find useful. And so what we started to do, like leaders loved assessments as long as they're practical, useful assessments. And so we started to use artificial intelligence to help people work out from what stages of development they tended to operate from. And when we started doing this in organizations and doing it in quite a practical, applied way, leaders really enjoyed it. And they're like, wow, some of their ahas was, I sort of thought, I am who I am. Now I can see the journey I've been on up to this stage in my career, and I can see that I'm not done. I sort of thought achieving lots of things and focusing on goals and juggling things, that was the ultimate. They sort of see I'm not cooked yet. I'm sort of halfway along this map, which you're showing me. There's more evolution to go.
A great thing to show an achiever, by the way.
Right. Yes. How do I get to the top of this map?
Yeah. You're only halfway.
By next week.
Yeah. So it starts there by giving them awareness of that. Other things we've sort of done, though, is shown them that their organization has a center of gravity as well, and they found that very useful because many of the leaders who end up coming to experiences or programs I'm part of or you're part of are often sort of quite late stage in some of these stages, and they're well ahead of their organizational cultures, and they feel frustrated often. They feel a bit lost. They feel lonely. And when they discover this, they sort of realize I'm not crazy. I'm just a little more evolved in this map than perhaps I used to be or our culture is. So that's sort of the starting point. And then basically leaders want to know, okay, what do I do with this? All right. How do I grow? What do I do with my team? All the different practical applied questions, and we can go from there. But once you've got the excitement, that's the starting point.
So let's zoom into that for a second, because I feel like anyone listening to this who is feeling lonely and is feeling like they may be a little bit either out of the clique or potentially a little bit more evolved is probably starting to get an accelerated heart rate and thinking, oh my gosh, are they onto something here? What are those stages? Like, run them through, beginner's guide. Like, what are the stages we're talking about here?
Yeah, so there are a few different maps, but they're all looking at the same thing. The one I find most helpful and the one we use, 7 main stages which you see adults go through. The earliest stage is opportunist. And so at opportunist, people have got pretty short-term perspective. It's sort of might makes right. It's about me. We might experience this quite early in our life. I can remember it with my siblings. It was all about who could win, who could get their own way. Would often be a little bit manipulative about things. You see these people less in leadership roles, but you see them sometimes. When I was in the US, actually, I was working with people from government. They said that stage is rife in government, which was sort of interesting. But people often evolve out of there reasonably early. Next stage is diplomat, which is sort of around conforming, fitting in, wanting to be part of. How do I belong? How do I join? The big fear is being excluded. And people are often like this. It could be at university, college, can be early in organizations where it's all about trying to fit in, be part of. How do things work around here? Eventually people realize that's not enough, really. I need to have some sort of craft, some sort of skill set, some sort of knowledge. And this is when people can start to move into this expert mindset. And this is about knowing your stuff, having the answers, being the expert, mastering your craft. And it's a really important stage to be in and go through. And often people will go, that's all you need.
Yep.
I'm done. I've got what I need and I'm the expert.
So you would find that there are leaders now who have parked their bus at that stage and feel like they can just ride out their career at that stage?
Less and less, and sort of industry by industry. Some organizations, the leaders are like this, and it can sort of work. I mean, particularly if you're sort of engineering, law, medical.
Yep.
If you're in the sort of expert role, it can work really well, but it gets tricky when
all the industry school prepares you for, right?
Right, yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yep.
It gets tricky when you then start managing people and you want to be the expert who knows it all, but now you've actually got to lead. And often people get compelled once they get into these roles or just before to move into the next stage, which is around achiever. And now it's less about inputs and knowledge. It's more about outcomes, results, juggling lots of duties. You start to be able to take more perspectives. And in organizations, this is very common stage that we see. People sort of think it's the last one, really, of being a leader. But it's not. So the next one after that, people sort of transition out of there when they start to get the sense, is this all there is? I've already achieved a lot. Is this what I do for the next 40 years of my life? And they start to sort of question it. And so the next one is redefining, where you sort of you ask a lot more questions. Sometimes it's called self-questioning. Question the organization, you might question society, question yourself, your values, your purpose. It can be quite a shaky stage. It's a scaffolding of achiever sort of starts to drop away. But it's a lot of what organizations are saying that they need is more of that. That's when you get more innovative, more challenge the status quo. Next one's transforming. And this is when people start to almost have more perspective. It's almost like from a higher level, they can see the organization, they can see the systems, they can see the interactions, see the moving parts. They can still achieve, but they're doing it in a different way. And the final one, so there's fewer people in there. The final one is alchemical. And alchemical, people start to see through the facade of a lot of things. They're able to sort of change the meaning in their mind much faster. Things become quite fluid. And often they see less purpose of being an organization. So we do see some of those people in organizations, but far fewer.
Oh, and what's this might be a weird question, but I can't find another way to frame it. What's the temperature of a person who is at that alchemical stage when you find them in an organization? Like, where are they? Are they frustrated and stifled? Are they leading change and making waves? Where do you find them?
They're hard to categorize, whereas it's easier to categorize some of the other ones. The alchemical people can be quite different. They can show up in different ways. Often it's not obvious. It can be sort of surprising when you realize, the ones that I meet, they're quite relaxed, actually. They find it a little, they definitely notice that they are different.
Yeah.
But they don't know why.
Yeah.
And so when they see this, they're like, okay, this is helpful.
Do you think that the system also helps notify them that they're different?
Oh yeah, no doubt. No doubt. I mean, you should be acting like an achiever acts, but you're not. There's some, but the ones we're seeing, they're not like the CEO. We're not seeing it as the CEO, they're often sort of slightly in the background doing interesting, quirky things. But very often, to be honest, people at those later stages, they often leave. So there's a few. What we're seeing more and more is organizations say we need these leaders at later stages, but this group we're going to give you, they're all achievers or something like that. And when we do the assessments, it turns out there's quite a lot of later stage people in there, but they're hiding in the organization. So there's a lot of people just hiding in the organization. They're the leaders who everyone's saying we need, but they're not acting like that because it's not safe to.
Yeah, so then it comes back to organizational permission, or at least the systems that allow people to express that side of themselves.
Yeah.
I'd be interested in your commentary around, I've found working with this model for quite some time, as you would, that once there's a difference of two stages between where the organisation is and where the individual is, that's when you get into trouble, because the dynamic tension between the way you want the world to be and the way the organisation is gets problematic, and trying to maintain or negotiate that tension all the time can sometimes for some people be exhausting.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's what we see. And so you sort of, you've just got to, like, how are you going to deal with that? I think having an assessment and a map is helpful because it just helps people go, okay, there's nothing wrong with me. There are some good, there's some really good aspects here that I'm discovering. It's at least partly the organization. And then how do I want to navigate that? Do I just relax and say that's the way it is? Many people leave. I mean, the metaphor I have had in my mind is it's sort of like a bungee cord, that these leaders, they're sort of pulling further and further out, but the organization bungee just keeps pulling them back. And so it takes a lot of energy, like you're saying, Pete. You either just pull back closer to where the organization is, or you try and stretch it and drag the organization forward, which is what the organization says it wants.
Exactly.
Or people leave.
Yeah.
Or they hang around and become miserable.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
At least now they know why, though.
Yeah. A good question for you would be, how do you find the reaction for people that take their assessment, that are, achiever, and I think they're at the end of the path, and all of a sudden get a reality shock that they're only midway along the line and that there's these other stages to go for? Do you find that, I would imagine there's two paths that could be gone on, and it's either the path to goodness and growth, or there's the Darth Vader move where people kind of feel a little bit put out of place, that they've been doing all these things all their life in order to achieve, and then they've found out that they're only, even though they probably think they're at the end, that they found out they're only halfway.
Yeah, I think they seem to find it intriguing. Like, we ask them after they take it. So the way we are trying to digitize and scale it all. So we see all of their answers. What we did is we interviewed different coaches and asked, how do you debrief this, and put some of the questions into a digital debrief. First question we ask is, what was your experience of taking the assessment and reading your results? And the most common things we hear here are, it was thought-provoking, and they enjoyed the openness of it, being able to explore. And they seem to enjoy it. Below achiever, they seem to be confused by the process and everything. At achiever, they're like, okay, all right, no, they like it. They want to know what to do. We haven't noticed them being too upset about it. At redefining, we find that's when they start to get really intrigued. And it's answering some big questions for them, and they're really keen to explore. It's not just about how do I apply this tomorrow in, my job.
Whereas I imagine those who are at that expert stage are probably thinking, oh, this is opening a can of worms I'm not sure I want to open, because I'm happy exactly where I am. Thank you very much.
Seems to be. And they'll question the validity. They'll question
the science or whatever.
But that's all right. I mean, we're seeing probably the type of people who are doing this are usually, they're often high potentials already. So we probably tend to get, the latter stage, mid to later stages. But we're interested in really scaling it. So some of the organizations are saying, could we do this for 80,000 people?
Wow.
Be like, wouldn't that be interesting to see the whole spectrum of things? So
an amazing data set to get as well.
That'd be incredible.
Yeah.
That'd be incredible, yeah.
It's just that, And is that something that's underway for you at the moment? Something similar
we're
on
getting
scale?
bigger and bigger groups. It just keeps growing. So there's one which is 20,000. They've opened up to 20,000 people to do stuff on the platform. And that's one of the things they could do is the vertical mindset indicator. So the group's getting bigger and bigger. So, we'll just learn more and more. It'd be really good.
It's unreal. That's fantastic. So anyone wanting to learn more about what you've just described and those vertical development stages, you've got your white papers on your website. They can go there.
That's right. Yeah, nicholaspetrie.com.
Cool. Awesome. So I think that'd be worth anyone who's interested in that space actually just exploring it a little bit further, because it can be quite an unlock for people, like you said, especially those who are in that self-questioning stage going, oh my gosh, is there any more to this? It's like, yeah, there is. There's 2 extra stages beyond this. Let's go.
I think what would be really interesting too, Nick, would be to get your impression of, because a lot of people out there are going to go, oh, you know what, I've taken leadership assessments before and things like 360s and, personality profiles. And how is this different to those? Because I know a lot of people that I talk to,
like a strengths assessment or something like that.
Strengths assessment. They talk, I've done one of those, and I say, well, this is really quite different. And they go, well, how is it different? So,
yeah, it really is different. People, because most leaders, they've done so many assessments and they've sort of seen it all. They feel like, okay, 360. They're not even really nervous by 360s anymore. They've done multiple 360s. No one we've met has done one like this. The leaders, like maybe some HR professionals have, L&D people, but the leaders, it's brand new for. So one of the sponsors in the organisation we work with, when we did the debrief, he said it was like it punched them in the ego. He did it was the first session of the first day of their program. It was like a punch in the ego. He said it was great. It really woke them up. So how's it different? It's not personality and it's not behavior. It's not 360s measuring your behaviors. It's not strengths or MBTI measuring your personality. What's different about it is it evolves, like you evolve. We think of ourselves as a static me, but that me we have is an evolving self. And so as you take it over time, you can get very different results because you are evolving. It's measuring your sense making, how you're taking stuff in, how you're processing it. And it's much deeper. People can tell it's much deeper, but it's getting at something like, I know I won't say the first question, it might bias it, but it's a lot deeper.
Yeah, great. That's fantastic. Unreal.
So how do you think that this thing, vertical development, why do you think it's important for the future of work and leadership for that matter? Because I know, when I first ran into your work, now correct me if I'm wrong here because I'm digging back into the memory and I'm getting old. So 2007, 2008, it was Future Trends in Leadership Development. So I think around about then was the first time I actually ran into your work, and that might have been your first paper even possibly.
Yeah, it was. Yep, that's right. So how's it going to be important for people? It's going to be a pretty crazy workplace coming up. Like it really is. Clients I'm speaking to, I guess it's different places. The North American ones, they're just like, it's never going back to face-to-face, never. There'll be some that it'll be hybrid forever. That's what they're saying. Like, wow, that's big. And that has enormous implications, which we haven't really thought through.
No.
And no one really knows what it's going to be like and what are all the implications of that. Other factors are going to be, it is going to be hyper connected. Like people are going to be connected in all sorts of ways all the time. Work is going to be endlessly available and endless. A company I was speaking to on the West Coast recently, the phrase they used is the work is endless, but your energy is finite. Because they're just like, people just cannot switch off at the moment. It just keeps coming and coming and coming. And they keep doing more and more, and there's no getting to the bottom of it.
Yeah.
So the leaders are going to be dealing with a world which is radically different from what they've led through.
Have you seen any evidence in the States of the right to switch off coming through? That's a big one that's come in with, I think it was Victoria Police announced a company policy for the right to switch off.
Is that right? No, I have not heard that. So I really think that sort of thing is coming, because at the moment, like, wellness is a big idea.
Huge.
But essentially, it's individual wellness. Like, here's some stuff each of you could do. Please do it. But the company itself is not necessarily.
But get it to me by Monday as well.
So it's like, I think it was a good start, I think, giving people wellness stuff, but it's got to go beyond that into the system, into the culture. Otherwise, that's an interesting one, the right to switch off. I reckon I suspect society is going to demand it. Something's changing. Look at the athletes, very different. Naomi is at Osaka, and then Simone Biles was a big one in the US, the gymnast. And it's just like, things are changing.
I mean, they both walked out of it. It wasn't like, I'm thinking about this from a commercial point of view for a second.
Yeah.
They weren't just stepping away from their craft. They were stepping away from their obligations. They had commercial obligations to front up to media, to be at a press conference. And in particular, I think it was Osaka got quite a lot of attention because she just said, I'm not going to that press conference because I just can't. And you just go, you have an obligation and you're choosing not to, and that's okay. Like, that's a big shift in the public mindset and the zeitgeist, right? That's a big shift. Yeah. And the complexity and the ambiguity that comes with now endorsements or dealing with professional athletes and the standard that sets across organizations is pretty big.
Yeah, and who's in charge?
Yeah,
is the WTA in charge? Is the athlete in charge? You see it, like, I think in some of the institutions, the rules are being changed around who's got the power. Because she apparently made a lot more money by doing that than if she had just stayed inside. She got more and more endorsements. Even in the world of media. Getting into your field, yourselves and Joe Rogan are breaking the model of, you don't have to be on the radio. Like in the US, it would be Howard Stern would be the old model, or Larry King. I mean, Joe Rogan can say and do whatever he wants because, before he got $100 million Spotify deal, right around the corner for you boys, I'm sure. And you're right on the track.
Exactly.
He's got a lot of freedom. So it was a little bit different from vertical development, but things are, there is going to, I just think there will be constant uncertainty coming up, and leaders and staff need to know, they're waiting for things to become more certain. I don't think they will become more certain. They're going to need to be much more capable of navigating constant uncertainty and complexity. And that's what vertical development can help.
I was going to say that strikes me as being quite typical of those later stages, is as you exit expert and move into those achiever and self-questioning type stages, you're entering into less and less certainty and more other people's perspectives and trying to bring less certain, more ambiguous versions of the truth and sit them all in front of you and say, right, what are we going to do about all of these rather than just this one? Would that be a fair characterization?
Yeah, essentially. Yeah, that's right. We asked leaders, actually, as part of the digital debrief, we asked them, what's the leadership challenge you're facing at the other? And they wrote down various challenges. We looked at all the data. The most common one leaders picked were ones around leading a change. Second most was trying to align stakeholders around projects, around decisions. The third one was trying to make decisions and massive complexity was the third most common challenge they chose. But what we asked them was, how are you approaching it now? They put in an answer. Okay. We said, how would you approach that challenge from one stage earlier, how would you approach the challenge from one stage later? And they wrote in answers, and we looked at the patterns, and it was very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
From one stage earlier, they said, I'd just put my head down, get the work done. I wouldn't question the approach. I wouldn't ask why we're doing it. I would basically just be completely task focused, forget about people. And that was their response. One stage later, what they said was they would pull up, look at the bigger picture. They would question, why are we even doing this in the first place? Is this the right approach? Are there different approaches? They would seek out other people's perspectives, and they would try to involve more people. And it was I just found it interesting because they had that available to them. That's sort of 3 different stages available to them, and they could put that hat on for a little bit. So I think we're very interested in, can you help people increase their range? Not just so you're at a stage of development. Can you actually start to stretch into different ranges, and how would you do that?
That's cool. So let me put a range in front of you and see where we go. Because one of the things that Pete and I work on is on innovation projects, and what you just talked about then spurred a thought in my head around a quote that I've had used or brought to me during an innovation project. And there's a quote by General George Patton. It says, a good plan violently executed now is better than a perfect plan next week. And it's interesting. I want to put it in front of us because it's an interesting one that's been brought up to me in an agile, fast-paced, fast-moving, let's get something done. Let's not overplan it. Let's not overthink it. And yet we're also saying in that complexity with multiple perspectives, it might be better to take a step back and think rather than just do. So I guess at a gut feel, one, where would you put a quote like that? A good plan violently executed now is better than a perfect plan next week. And where do you see that fitting, and where do you see that not fitting?
Yeah.
And you won't be scored based on your answer, by the way.
Well, I'm just thinking that's exactly how I operate. So it must be.
Yep.
I mean, it sounds earlier stage, but also appropriate at times. One of the research projects I was doing with one of the technology companies in the US, they were interested in this. They were interested in complexity, and there was this idea around there was an idea around requisite complexity, matching your inner complexity with the complexity of the environment. And what this company was interested in is, can we help leaders identify the correct requisite complexity for different situations they face?
That's cool.
And what would be the micro moves they could do that, and in this language, is around to amplify complexity that we are going, so we can meet the complexity, or to dial it back. And so the pattern quote strikes me as one, we're going to dial it back and just go fast. And so essentially, and there are a few different criteria we're able to see from the research around when to do that. And it was to do with how long have you, what they found in projects, actually, it might be interesting for Agile. They said projects were perfect for that. Early in the project, you want to amplify the complexity by diverging. Later in the project, when you've got less time, you're further along, you've got to converge and do what sort of maybe Patton's saying. Was to do with that. Is the unknown solutions already existing? Just go fast. If no, have a look around. Does anyone actually know the best approach? If no, then you're going to need to amplify complexity. So this idea of going up and down, just the idea that probably is an appropriate response sometimes.
So then let's dial it back to the stages. At what stage do you find people have almost the cognitive flexibility to a certain extent to go up and down stages and to be able to see the opportunity to do that?
Because what I heard you speak about then, Nick, is almost like the Cynefin framework, right? Figure out what is the requisite complexity of the project you're on, and then what is the best mindset to operate in that space. Yeah.
It's funny, that Cynefin, so funny, isn't it? With different models, leaders will look at them through the lens of the stage they operate from and go, that's not helpful, or I love that.
I'm more confused than I was before I've seen that.
It's a good question. At what stage? I'm just picturing different leaders I worked with when introducing these different ideas. And I think it is later. Certainly, there's a difference between liking the concepts. Mm-hmm. They like the concept of range. They like the idea of, matching it. And then it's a question of, do they have, that ability to actually apply it day to day in the challenge? And I think if I look at leaders who have got really good range, I think it's certainly beyond achiever. It's redefining and transforming in particular. It can be hard for transforming leaders, I see, because they've almost got to work harder to display. Probably redefining seems to be a good one. They're not too far away from the organizational culture already, so they can do the achiever thing. Once you're into transforming, it seems to take quite a bit more effort to be able to adjust to where your culture might be.
It's definitely my experience as well.
Yeah, right.
I find it also, and it comes back to your question about requisite complexity, and I think it fits more into requisite authority. It depends on the amount of scope that leader's got, because if they've got, if they can kick a ball 200 meters, but the size of the field's only 100, they never get to explore the full extent of their range and they don't have the authority to do that either. So
that's true.
I'm interested in the dynamics between being a late stage leader under a much lower stage, because I've found working with this model that can be quite frustrating for both people involved.
Yeah. What have you guys noticed about later stage leaders in organizations, how they experience it and what they do as a result?
The thing that's coming to my mind is actually the difference between known and embodied, right? And so particularly with the late stage leaders that I've worked with is there's almost, and it might have to do with your football field analogy, is actually they know they can kick 200 meters, but they've never done it. They've never done it. They've never embodied it. They've never actually felt what it feels like to really put the foot through the leather. You know what I mean? And try that out for once. And I think they're desperate for an opportunity to give that a go. But because it's never been done, again, you're dealing with a leader in a development edge. You're dealing with someone who wants a room to try and be wrong, room to try and fail to some degree. And again, you're talking about personal development now. So we're not talking about, fail fast and let's build an innovative culture. You're saying put your neck on the line, try something and be prepared to trip over along the way. That's a personal challenge that you're asking someone to take on. So that's what I've seen is almost like as the development happens, you almost get this stretching, a bit like your bungee cord, this stretching between what they feel they can do and play on a daily basis and where they actually think they could stretch to if they were given half a chance.
Right.
And actually, and then I can think of one person who was there, and to the conversation we talked about before, upped and left, went to another organisation, and within the first 6 weeks got to try every single thing he hadn't been able to embody, went into an incredibly complex organisation, had to deal with a whole bunch of personality issues, got to flex every bit of muscle he'd just grown and went, yeah, I'm good with this. Okay, cool. Now what?
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's good.
Your thoughts?
That's good.
I'm still thinking.
Okay. Carry on thinking.
I can't even remember.
I was wondering what that look was. I'm glad you identified it.
No, that's good. Okay, so that covers off that. Well done with that little curveball question for you there, Nick. Very good.
Yeah.
What's up for you next? What are you working on?
Yep. What's the next of Nick Petrie?
Definitely interested in doing things at scale. I think that's one I'll be operating on for quite a long time. Like, how would you do this? It's typically done for a program of 20, 30 leaders. That's great. What would it look like if you really did do it for thousands of leaders at once? That would open up, I think, very new opportunities. Like if you could make the whole organization awake and aware to vertical development and all having discussions at the same time. I don't know if that's been done very often, certainly not in big organizations. So I would love to see what will happen when we do that. So that's probably the main one. And then, something we're working on quite a bit is how do you help the organization evolve its culture? So it's not just individuals doing it, but, and traditional way of thinking about it is like just get lots of individuals and eventually it will add up. There'll be a critical mass. And we're not really seeing that. You actually need to deliberately focus on the collective culture. So that'll be a big piece for me coming up.
What about for teams? Because one of the benefits of this model is that there's a real subject-object move. Like the subject of one stage becomes the object of the next stage beyond it. So you can only reflect on where you've been by getting to that next stage. And, like lots of things, we have a little bit of discontent for where we've just been once we move into that new stage because we can't believe we existed for so long at that previous stage. So I'm interested about for teams, what happens when – do you think there's a benefit from teams being able to realise the stage of the team that the team's at collectively? Because, in teams there's people at various levels of development, which, causes – tensions. It also causes people in certain stages to work together and create certain team dynamics. I'm wondering what you see as the development for vertical development in a team's perspective.
Yeah, well, we're starting to do quite a bit of that now because team leaders are saying, how do I do this with my teams? So we said, let's find out. Let's start doing it. And so we've started doing it. And some of the early sort of concerns was, them all finding out they're operating from different stages. How do you handle that? So we're not getting them to talk. What we're saying, and we say this just in general now, is hold the stages lightly and take the development seriously. So don't get too hooked up at who's at which stage and this sort of thing. We also call an indicator the assessment we use, vertical mindset indicator. It can't define who you are. No. You are an achiever. You're more complex than that, but it gives you an indication.
I think you mentioned at the start of this conversation, centers of gravity. I've found that to be quite a useful way to talk about it as well, where it's not you're fixed to one stage. It's more like there's a sort of a swell of gravity around that particular stage, but you kind of are a free-flowing individual that can hop around.
Yeah, exactly. Which I think all of that stuff's very important once you start doing it in a team setting. So the way we've been doing it is everyone goes through in the team and does the individual one and then has a group debrief, but it's just focused on each of us individually. We can have discussions about different things. They love that. It's really good. They've all got the same language now. And then part 2 is they will sort of take just a very short teams assessment and answer a series of questions on the platform, which then become the content for the second session.
Cool.
And then we talk about team. And that one's a lot around where do we think we are operating from as a team mostly? How do we know? What do we see in our behaviors and the way we operate? Where do we need to be operating from? And, very often there's a gap of one and a half or 2 stages.
Yep.
And interestingly, I find fascinating, the teams and the cultures always seem to lag the individuals. Like it's not like you could add up the individual aggregate and that's where the culture is or the team is. When you get a group together, the group descends. And so they're all operating below their individual stage, which is fascinating.
You've got a theory on that, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think and for me, it's something that I've tested and it seems to be the truth through facilitating workshops and actually also being participant in vertical development, edge development over my career and sitting with other groups of people involved in it is it tends to default to the person of the lowest stage of development within the group. That tends to become the kind of the default base plate for where it goes to because people don't want to be excluded and they want to feel like they're including everyone. And to do that, you need to include that sort of most fundamental stage of the person who's that so they don't feel excluded. And it just seems to be a natural dynamic that seems to evolve.
So the group then descends to the lowest common denominator and carries at that level. So then the cost of bringing the wrong team member becomes amplified.
Oh, that's an interesting point.
Yep.
Wow.
So there's the dynamic.
That is an interesting point.
When you're choosing a team, how do you develop? It comes back to your requisite complexity again of what's the requisite complexity of the project and the deliverables, and what would be the requisite vertical development stages to meet that where it's at in order to, because I always think about vertical development is, as we said with the center of gravity, it's like someone being a runner. You will, at a certain level of fitness, you'll always be able to run for an extensive amount of time at the level of fitness you're at. But when someone asks you to run at that, next level up, you can do that for a little bit of time, but you'll exhaust yourself so quickly and then you default back. But if you keep running at that extra pace again and again and again, after a while that becomes your new pace. And so how do you, and you would do this as well, especially at Achiever, most people are used to that development occurring quite quickly. And I think a lot of the pain and suffering I see around this vertical development approach and the models are, it's a long time investment. It's not a fast shift model. It's a year to 2 years for one of those stages, sort of bare minimum. And are people willing to participate in development over extended periods of time, especially in an environment and a world where it's go, 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 get it done?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I'm saying, are they willing to? Are the individuals willing to? And are the companies willing to? I mean, are you seeing them willing to?
I think so. I think part of the willingness is that we've had all these other approaches for so long and they worked in that environment. Again, your requisite complexity, but now the complexity of the environment is so much more. We need something else because what those other things we've done, they just don't work anymore.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, the other thing I'm noticing is the CEOs are changing.
Interesting.
Oh, wow.
Which is quite interesting. They're talking about different things. They're talking about it publicly. That's been quite interesting, and talking in many of them in quite late stage ways, which I've been quite intrigued by, and doing it sort of more publicly, which has been quite interesting. So, and what happens when the people at the top of the organization are operating from later stages? How does that impact things? So I don't know. That'll be an interesting one as we keep watching.
Definitely. Well, look, I think we're pretty much run out of time.
Right.
Where can we follow you next? What are you doing next? Where can we find more of what you've got on your plate, and where do people find more of you?
And then I've got 2 questions for you before you leave.
Sounds
Short
good.
ones.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. So when we for public events that we do, they usually come through LinkedIn. So if you just look up Nick Petrie, if you're interested in attending some stuff or finding out what's new, what we're putting out, things like that. And then the website's the other good place to look, nicholaspetrie.com.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Very good. So rapid fire questions.
Yeah, rapid fire. It's our end of session rapid fire questions. So if you had to boil it down into 3 things that you think summarize vertical development in your work, what would they be? 3 kind of bullet points.
First one is that we are not static. We're evolving. Second, we evolve through predictable stages of development. And third, as you go through these stages, you get new capacities, new things come online that you didn't have before, but you don't want to leave things behind as well. You just want to extend your range. And also, it's important to know there's also there's no rush. There's no rush to get through this stuff. It's like when you're in your 20s, just live your 20s as well as you can. There's no need to rush through to your 30s. Just enjoy each stage you're in and fill it out properly.
Excellent. Great. I think they're 3 fantastic suggestions going forward. If you had a suggestion or a challenge for everyone at home to participate in for the next couple of weeks that might engage them in or accelerate their development, what would that one suggestion, like the challenge for people at home?
Challenge for people at home, I would say one of the most developmental things people can do is to seek others' perspectives. So see if you can increase the amount of perspectives you're seeking out from others. The other really interesting thing we're doing at the moment is around networks and who you know and who knows you. And most people end up with quite closed, insular networks. You hang out with a lot of people who are quite similar to you and who know each other. The way to get past that is to open up your network. So seek out some perspectives from people who are not within your network at the moment. Mm-hmm. One way to do that is to reconnect with latent ties. So a latent tie is someone who you used to be close with, but you haven't connected with them for a long time. But if you actually rang them up, you'd hit it off exactly where you were 15 years ago or 10 years ago.
Yeah, awesome.
So seek out some perspectives from some diverse people.
That's fantastic.
It's a great suggestion.
Yeah, absolutely. Take that one on board.
Well, that's it for today, Nick, and we'd like to thank you for obviously spending some time with us, and especially in the middle of a lockdown with a house move in combination of all that VUCA situation that you've got going on for yourself. We will put all the show notes, all the tips from today's session in the show notes so that people can find you and find your work, which I think would be a really great way to get introduced to the concept of vertical development. And yeah, we'd like to thank you very much for participating today.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks, Dave. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome,
Excellent.
mate. Appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks.
All right, mate.
Okay, cheers, guys.
See ya.
Ciao.
Bye. That's the end of today's episode. Thanks for listening. What's Next is brought to you by The Next. We are workplace futurists and transformation facilitators. You can reach us on the web at www.thenextnxt.com.au. Please ensure you subscribe to our channel to ensure you don't miss our up and coming episodes.